And the topic is on attention, and at the at the beginning of your article, you start with how we generalize attention and how we understand attention in general, in especially psychological theories. And the one that is like the most known of is where we talk about a spotlight. And what I understand by spotlight, what has in my mind is that it's omnipresent. It's a cognitive faculty. It's a cognitive act, at least, and that it's like mental and it's a conscious act. But in the article, you will argue at certain points against the spotlight theory, saying that how it neglects some part of us in certain aspects, and what these parts of us actually contribute to the attention itself. And you will also divide attention into levels as well. So since this article also relates to Merleau Ponty and bases its grounds to Merleau Ponty's theory, I first want to ask you, what do you see problematic in this theory of spotlight? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what you understand about spotlight theory yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a nice question, a complicated question. Thank you for reading my article so carefully. I thought that maybe starting with the way in which we understand attention in an everyday context would be the better way to make my point clear. And I mean, if you look at psychological research, of course, you have a great deal of different theories, and even giving an overview of these different theories would take probably not even an article, but a whole book. So that's not something you can do in a research paper. But dealing with these theories, I noticed that actually there is one main idea that stretches across many forms of psychological attention theories, and it actually also reflects, in a way, how we think about attention, even if we are not psychology graduate students or something like that. And I think that this metaphor of the spotlight is actually pretty apt to describe how we tend to think about attention. The idea of the spotlight is actually very simple. If you ask somebody, what is attention? What do you understand? What do you mean when you say attention? They will probably say it's something like you concentrate upon something, that thing you are attentive to is more clear, is central to your experience, or it's important for your interests, or whatever. So you have this kind of mental light that you can direct towards things in the world, and when they are lighted up by attention, they are more clear. They are the focus of your attention. And this is actually a fine metaphor. I mean, for most of our attentional behavior in everyday contexts, this is a fine understanding of attention. But if you try to develop a scientific theory of it, you will see that this metaphor has major shortcomings. And I think one of the most important ones, and the one on which I focus in the article, is that this spotlight metaphor implies, as you said, that attention is something purely cognitive, purely mental, is something that our minds do. And I don't think that's the case. I think that attention is a kind of bodily behavior, an embodied behavior, something that the whole body, the whole person, if you want, actually does. And I think that this idea is actually reflected in Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception. There are only a few pages on that in Merleau-Ponty, so there is no full-fledged theory, but I think the main points are precisely these. Merleau-Ponty says, on the one hand, many psychologists understand attention as purely intellectual and as a spotlight. This is not a useful theory. I think, says Merleau-Ponty, that attention is something creative, is something behavioral. And I try to expand on this criticism of Merleau-Ponty in order to develop something new. This is what I call embodied attention.
Yeah, it's a nice introduction for me too. Thank you. So there's like lots of things that I can follow up. from your sentences. So you finished up with an embodied attention and the role of body, and I see that the role of body is actually manifold in your writing. That we have movements directed towards attention, and we have movements that we just regularly perform without considering whether we want to attempt something or not. We just walk or sit down or have conversations going on, and then there is this like attention that is directed towards our body, that is directed toward our perception and getting the sensations that we get from our body. So when you say embodied attention, what do you what elements do you think are constitutive of this attention? That bodily movements, for example, how do they allow us to have like this kind of an attentive experience in general?
Yeah, thank you. This is the central question maybe of my paper. I think first of all, it's important to differentiate between two kinds of attention. I don't know if kinds is the right word. At least we have to differentiate between two directions of attention, if you want. We have an attention usually that is directed towards external things. I'm attentive to the laptop, to what you are saying. I'm also attentive to the pen I'm playing with right now and whatever. These are external objects to me. But obviously, if you are in pain or hungry or thirsty or whatever, you will also have a kind of attention directed towards your own body. You will pay attention to where is the spot in which I am feeling pain or whatever in the different contexts. And I want to differentiate these two because when I speak about embodied attention, I don't mean, at least not in the first place, I don't mean an attention directed towards my own body. What I mean is an attention directed to external things and people in our surrounding worlds, an attention that has bodily components. And I think this is a major difference. The second part of your question was about the bodily elements of attention. And this is something I'm still actually working about. The paper I published in Phenomenology and Cognitive Sciences is really only a first take on the problem. I'm planning on publishing a book on the topic in the coming years. And I think a nice way to understand what I mean by embodied attention could be taking an example. In my spare time, I play music. I play piano and cello. And I think making music is a nice example of what I mean by embodied attention. If you play an instrument, you will be familiar with this. At the very start, when you are a beginner trying to understand which notes you have to play, you will pay concentrated attention to the movements of your hands or feet, depending on the instrument you are playing. You will really look, okay, now I have to play this with my index finger and now I have to play this with the other finger. And then when you improve, you will see that your attention is not directed to the single movement of the single fingers anymore, but you are taking into account the melody as such, or the music piece, or whatever. It's important to you at the moment. But does it mean that we forget about the finger movements? No, of course. There is no attention in music, at least in playing music, without some kind of movement in order to play the music. I mean, it's completely trivial, of course, but I think this is actually the main idea. And even if we listen to music, that's the same. We will have always, in listening to music, some kind of tendency towards bodily movement. We can tap on the table with our fingers, we can snap them, we can move our feet or just our head. And even if you are, very still in a concert hall, listening to a viola solo from contemporary music, even in that case, you will have probably some adjustment on your seat, or you have to stretch your feet because after some time they will start to hurt or whatever. So there is no kind of attention, even in music, that is purely mental, purely intellectual. Some kind of bodily movements is always at work. I think this is the first thing that I want to stretch. Some kind of movement is always implied, even in contexts in which we think attention will be purely mental. And the second point is also very important to me, and which is what I call the transcendental condition for attention. I think that the body is a transcendental condition for attention. And what I mean by this is that without the body, we couldn't be attentive. And this is also a point that could be interesting, of course, for research on artificial intelligence and whatever else. I think you have to have a body. And in the case of human beings, which is the only one I can speak about, of course, at least from a phenomenological perspective, the fact is very clear. At least the main idea is very clear. Bodily movements on the one hand, but also on the other hand, the body has to disappear, if you want. What I mean by this is that the body must be sound. You have to be in some way healthy. You have to be not hungry, not thirsty. You have to sit in a comfortable position, even in order to pay attention to a scientific talk or whatever. Your hearing must be okay, and everything else, I mean, you can go on for hours, just making a list of things that your body has to fulfill. So I think that the body really has to go in the background, and in order for this to be possible, the body must be sound. You must be healthy and everything else. This going in the background of the body is the transcendental condition for attention. This is what I mean basically by embodied attention. The important point is you don't pay attention to your body. This is the condition for paying attention to external things, but this doesn't mean that the body isn't there. It's just in the background, but you need this background in order to pay attention.
Yeah, thank you. And I think like the first thing that you said, like paying direct attention to your fingers when you're trying to play piano for the first time, then the body is not in the background, right? It's on the foreground, and it's like there's something that your body doesn't really know the shape that it needs to take before moving on to some more complex stuff. But also body can distract us too, like and I now want to ask, it is involved with movement, but it also has to be in a certain kind of a balance too, in order for us to attend to something. And you said that, hold on. So yes, about the movement. So the body is for you necessary, it is a transcendental condition, but do you think that the movement is necessary too? For example, when I will be sitting in a concert, as in your example, and would not have a movement that is like proper to the situation, but that movement that I'm creating is also some way not really conscious. And how do you think that the body is able to regulate itself to its certain position for us to be attentive? Who do you think that is deciding there, or is there any decision? Like, how do we take the proper form in a given context?
Yeah, thank you. This is really a fascinating question. I mean, in order to really answer that, we should go into details on discussions about bodily memory and this kind of stuff, of which I'm not an expert. So I can only answer as far as attention is concerned in this context. I think on the one hand that in most cases our body knows what to do. And I don't think that it is correct to speak about an unconscious in this context. Of course, there are other contexts in which the concept of the unconscious is more than apt. But in this way, it's not something unconscious because it's not something that has something to do with consciousness or something to do with the mental or whatever. If you go to a concert hall, your body will know which positions are comfortable to you in order for you to be able to pay attention to the ongoing concert. For example, you will probably know that hearing a classical concert with just one instrument on the scene is not going to work if you are standing. This is just a big impairment to your attention, at least in some contexts. And so your attitude going into the concert hall will be to expect to have some kind of seat. And then you will take place on your seat, and you will know, without explicitly acknowledging this, that having your legs in a certain position is going to be comfortable for you, and have legs in another position would not be comfortable to you. And if you pay attention to this, you will notice that your body will automatically, if you want, take a certain position depending on what you are paying attention to. For example, in my case, I tend to be very attentive to music in a very kind of relaxed sitting position with the feet on the ground and the hands on my laps. And this is the way in which I mostly pay attention to music. But if I have to pay attention to, I don't know, giving a seminar or a lecture, I know that my body will tend to stand up and take a walk around the room in which I'm teaching. I like to speak and teach while walking. I have no idea why, but it starts automatically. At a certain point while teaching, I stand up and and start going up and down the room. And if you are paying attention to something else, to a movie, maybe you will have this tendency to cross your legs or whatever. So the body knows actually in different contexts which is the best posture, the best position to assume in order for you to be able to forget about the body and concentrate on what's going on. And as I said at the beginning, I think there are many more topics related to these, bodily memory certainly, but as far as attention is concerned, I think the main idea is that the body knows how to allow you to pay attention. This will be the main idea, I think.
Yeah, great, thank you. I also, it feels like it's a double movement there, because body knows what position it needs to take for us to be attentive, but also sometimes even we are like uncomfortable, and you mentioned it in article, if it's something is like really interesting for us, we are able to concentrate on the worst situations as well. How do you think that is that is possible? How are, I mean, again, maybe this is wrong for me to do, but I constantly try to search for a subject who is like deciding, who is wanting to attend, and who is trying to prepare the way for that person to attend, etc. And again, this is going to be my question: how do we get so involved that we disregard our body completely, even if it's like uncomfortable in some situations?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I mean, of course, I have to say the subject is you. You cannot make a difference between the subject and the body. I would say the subject is you as a mind-body unity in a way, and that's why I'm also insisting on the fact that saying that the body has to disappear doesn't mean that the body isn't there. It means the body is there, but in such a way as to not take your attention for itself in a way. So what is doing all this stuff, what is taking the right position in the concert hall, what is involved with things, is always you as a mind-body unity. And if you understand it that way, you cannot really ask a meaningful question about who is taking the decisions, because it's you as a person in a certain situation. I wouldn't even distinguish too strong between you and the situation you are living in, because of course the decisions you have to take are coming from the situation in which you live. You cannot just, decide something out of the blue, which doesn't have anything to do with anything in your surrounding world. You have to be an involved subject, an embedded subject. This would be the concept that most scholars are using today. Being embedded means you cannot really distinguish between the thing that is thinking and making decisions and the surrounding world. It is me in my surrounding worlds. And so if I decide that the concert sounds interesting, I want to go. Why do I decide that? Yeah, probably because of my surrounding world. It is in my city. I know the pianist playing, and I think he or she is very good in doing that, and I think I will enjoy myself and have some kind of pleasure in listening to the music. So I decide and I go, and my body comes along. We know what we have to do. That's how I would try to describe it. Now that I'm thinking of it, coming along of the body was really not the right concept. What I meant is me as a unity, I do it, and the body knows how to do that.
Yeah, it's actually embedded and embodied. Um, yeah, before starting recording, we talked about how actually phenomenology is actually dealing with that very basic things that we are actually experiencing and intuitively know of, that there are certain things out there that they are not of equal value, that some things are easier to attempt, some things are more achievable, and creating a spotlight theory or creating a theory in which everything seems like as if they are standing in the same plane, whereas some things are actually more achievable from our perspective. For example, we are maybe a good listener, and it is for us to listen easier to listen than to maybe talk at some certain situations. So it is easier to be able to get involved in a situation that I'm familiar of, and that is also relating back to the body. And this is also coming to the distinction that you have made, I think, between primary and secondary attention, because uh, as I remember, in the primary attention, we are opening up to a field, we're opening up to certain possibilities before even starting to search for something. It's like skimming in a book, like we are there, but it's not like we are actively there analyzing each word, kind of a thing. Whereas in secondary attention, you also kind of involve the spotlight theory and saying that yes, there are some mental aspects to it, it's not completely bodily, but we have to separate and we have to understand what allows this secondary attention to appear in the first place. Can you talk a little bit about this distinction in your own words?
Yes, yes. This is actually a distinction that Merleau Ponty himself does. I mean, it's too much. It's a distinction Merleau-Ponty hints at in the phenomenology and perception, and even in the structure of behavior, but it's not very clear what he means by that. And I think that it's actually a very nice idea on which I'm trying to expand. And also in this case, I think we can start with an example. Let's say you are cooking a meal and at the same time speaking with friends of yours about I don't know what to do in the afternoon or whatever. I would say that in this case you really have two kind of attentions at work. On the one hand, you are almost automatically, but only almost automatically, you have to pay attention to that, cooking your meal. There's something that happens without you thinking too much about that. It's just that you are in a field of possibilities. You have your pans and your vegetables and whatever, and you know what you want to do, and that happens. And if you want without you thinking too much about that, this is the reason why you can also at the same time concentrate on having a conversation with your friend about plans for the afternoon. I will say that this kind of attention involved in cooking without thinking about it is actually a kind of primary attention that is actually always at work when we leave and do stuff. This is just an example. It is something which is not explicitly done by us, something that happens, but if you are just walking down the street thinking about a paper you have to write, you will also have some kind of primary attention involved in, not having a crash with an auto or with a car, or not squeezing the tail of a cat who is resting on the street or whatever. You are paying some kind of attention to the streets, and you're walking in order not to fall down. But obviously, your explicit attention, your secondary attention, is thinking about the paper you have to write. I think this is the situation in almost all of our everyday actions, that there is a first primary attention which is just a field of possibilities. You can do that, we can do that, but not that other things. for example, because we are in the kitchen and not on the street. And then you can have a second layer of attention, explicitly thinking about that. For example, if you are trying to cook a really complicated meal with many ingredients and it's for your first time, you will probably not be able to speak with your friend at the same time about plans for the afternoon. And so that's an example in which primary and secondary attention, in a way, collaborate in order to reach a common goal. But in the most situation, primary attention is something very basic that allows us to go about in the world without accidents, probably. And the main point is, I don't think that's purely automatic. I think that is also a form of attention, of paying attention to the world.
Yeah, maybe now differentiating attentive times and inattentive times from one another will clarify the primary attention, especially perception and attention. I know that there are like too many terms and sometimes vague distinctions between the two, and I think Merleau Ponty would somehow agree that there is like no direct perception, that is like just sense data that is like coming unconfigured, basically. How do you make this distinction between perception and primary attention, for example?
Yes, also very crucial question. I would answer like this. I think for people who are healthy, perception and primary attention are not distinguishable. There is no kind of perception in no context whatsoever, which is not already structured by some kind of primary attention. You can take whatever example you want. You will always see that your field of perception is always focused along a certain thing which is particularly important to you. I don't think that there is something like a pure perception without attention structuring it along paths of what is most important to you. There are some exceptions to this, but I think we have to go into the topics of illnesses. For example, in depression, if you are depressed, probably you will know such situations in which nothing seems to make sense to you, and that's precisely the point in which you have no interest, and because you have no interest, you have no attention. In that case, we could talk about speaking of a pure perception, but otherwise we don't have this. This is still an interesting distinction for theoretical purposes. We can distinguish between what we just perceive and do not pay any attention to. For example, for me, the window on my back, I'm seeing it in the Zoom call, of course, but I'm not paying any attention to this. This is still a part of my perceptual field, but I'm not attentive to it, not even in a primary way. So it's theoretically an interesting construction. We can use these concepts in order to understand each other, but I don't think that normal people who are not suffering from specific illnesses do experience moments of pure perception without attention. Maybe just a last point on this. What is then non-attention? I think non-attentive situations are actually very rare in our everyday contexts. I mean, one classical example is the teacher who says to the kid or to the student, please pay attention. What does it mean, actually? Does it mean that the kid or the schoolboy or the schoolgirl is not actually paying attention to anything? This is usually not the case. The kid or the schoolboy is usually paying attention to the Facebook notifications, or to Twitter, or to a book, or to the landscape outside of the window, or whatever. Is or she is not just inattentive. To find really inattentive moment, you have to think about a really rare situation in which you are really tired, just sitting on your sofa and maybe even sleeping, almost at sleep. Okay, in this borderline situation, we can say that somebody is not paying attention to anything in the surrounding world. But I think otherwise it's really complicated to come up with examples, with everyday examples in which we are actually not paying attention to anything at all.
Yeah, this was a Great distinction, and I think you kind of answered what I wanted to ask, that is like paying attention. And this was interesting because at first, for example, when we are like an amateur at something and started to like get involved with that situation, we just cannot jump to the primary attention, and instead it has to be conditioned from secondary attention or from that explicit attentive state where we first learn and maybe actually teach our body and try to like make it a habit of that configuration, you know, that's what happens if I stay in this certain situation and in this certain state, and how should I use my hands, or where do I put my hands, etc. And these things, they have to be somehow learned and relearned before it becomes a habit, and it just brings forth whenever we come to the situation again. So would you think that like we first have this secondary attention, which is more reflective, maybe a little bit slower, and something that is like not direct? Do you think that this is what is conditioning the primary attention, or do you make any such distinctions when you are talking about an experience?
Well, I would say this is a very complicated question. I will just take one main point out of it. I think that actually with this schema of primary and secondary attention, you can actually explain fairly well what we usually call habit formation or learning a skill. If we come back to my example with playing the piano, if you are a beginner, then you are paying a lot of reflective attention, secondary attention to the movements of your finger, which note do I have to play and which movements do I have to make. And then learning to play the piano means that all these movements, all these attentional activity can become a primary attention. The fingers are doing things, and this is the condition of possibility that you can play that particular piece of music. But then the expert player knows that he has or she has to pay explicit attention to certain points in the melody, or maybe concentrate on thinking about a certain thing or on a certain landscape in order to really grasp the character of the piece or whatever else. You have to this is actually habit formation. Secondary attention builds habits so that it can only be primary attention, and secondary attention can focus on something else, which improves your performance or whatever. So I think that this schema is actually habit formation. I think that's basically what makes out expertise in every situation, in every context, in our experience. You could say that's the reason why you say that an expert player or an expert person in whatever topic is something who has experience in that. The experts have experience so much that they do not have to pay explicit attention to that, and they can focus on more abstract things in that context. So I think in this sense, this was the last point of your question, the relation to experience. I think that this is exactly the point. Experience is always structured by attention, but if we are experts, we can focus on more abstract aspects of that experience, because primary attention is just doing the work for us in a way.
Yeah, and now I'm reminded of some of the examples that you have given in the article about this previous research. That, for example, toddlers like make something closer to themselves in order to better observe it, or just to learn it, or just like our eye movements and refocusing and orientation of our body, etc. And even when we are like forming a habit, or just like we are actively using our secondary attention, we have this kind of a body that is already conditioned from previous experience and knows itself so much so that it gets closer to the thing that is inspecting, for example. Even though we are like still learning about this thing and still forming a habit, we know how to form a habit in the first place. So I think it's always like this reciprocal relationship where body is involved and then the secondary attention is involved, and they're like consequently and at the same time in sync. And it is really interesting. I mean, it's hard to dissect it, and it's dissecting it is actually something that is counterintuitive to our experience. We get kind of disattached from our experience when we do that. And yeah, I want to relate this to your third point on the attention, that is like the creativity of attention. And we are talking about habit formation, and that is also creating something new that hasn't existed for us prior, and it is also creation. But can you talk a little bit about how attention is creative and how it is not discovering but rather forming some things?
Yes, this is definitely a point that Merleau Ponty makes very clearly in his Phenomenology on Perception, and I think that this is just probably true, or at least very fascinating to think about attention in terms of creativity, not only of embodiment, because usually we tend to think about attention as something, just making things a little more clear, but things are always already there, and it doesn't change really much about the world in which we live it. I don't think that's the case. I mean, just take two experiences of the same thing, if you want, and try to differentiate between an attentive experience and an inattentive experience. They will be completely different. Just think about, I don't know, going to a movie in a movie theater, and you are not paying attention to the movie at all. You are thinking about what you have to do in the morning or whatever, because you are very stressed out and very busy, and you will probably not remember anything about the movie. You will not even experience something related to the movie. When your friend asks you how was the movie, you will probably say, I didn't understand anything and it was very boring. I spent my whole time thinking about something else. But then again, if you go to the same movie actually paying attention to it, you could actually discover that the movie was actually very interesting, and then you will have an experience of the movie that says something to you. And in a situation that is actually meaningful for us, even in our personal history, we were paying attention to something, very, very deeply and concentrated attention to something. And that's the reason why I think that actually paying attention really changes the experience of something that we can make. In this sense, I speak of the creativity of attention. Something is in our experience because we are paying attention to it. There is no window beside myself if I'm not paying some kind of attention to it. I'm not experiencing the world in that way. And in this sense, I think that attention is itself creative because it really gives meaning to the experiences we make. But I think also that that creativity is a condition for attention. You have to be creative in order to understand and to interpret the world in a certain way, such that you can pay attention to things to which you weren't paying attention before. I would say that is a major aspect of creativity. A creative person is a person that pays attention to things that are not interesting to many other people.
Yeah, and you talk about quantitative and qualitative differences, right? Mm-hmm. So spotlight theory assumes that it's just being exposed more and bringing forth more, and just like you can see it better if you like think about literally a lamp illuminating something, whereas in the other way it's like some kind of a landscape. Some things are like more important and takes more space mentally, and also in the terms of value that you give. And these things are actually how we choose what are we attending to or not. So this is what we are understanding from creativity, and I think you kind of connected it to the Gestalt, and I think Merleau Ponty was also connecting it to Gestalt, right?
Yes, because the concept of Gestalt is very handy, because basically Gestalt is something that you can perceive, you can see or smell even maybe, but it's also something that has a meaning. And this is precisely the point. I mean, understanding attention in purely quantitative terms means, yes, something is more clear, something is takes up more space, or whatever is more lighten up, or something like that. But I think that it's actually a qualitative point. Attention is the function that allows us to understand something as meaningful for us. And in this sense, it's really a qualitative difference. Something is not meaningful for us, we can forget about it, we can pay no attention to that, whatever. But something is very meaningful to us. We are paying attention to that. This is a qualitative difference to everything else that surrounds us in a moment, in a certain moment. And actually, you can even go further on this way and say, what we are paying attention to is meaningful, and everything else is actually structured around this thing that is meaningful for us. For example, in this very moment, my conversation with you is obviously very important, is in the center of my attention, and everything else is just a corollary. It's just something that stands on the side. For example, my glass with water is for me only meaningful because it allows me to speak with you and carry on the conversation without having, you know, to cough or whatever. And this pen is just a means to take notes in order to carry on the conversation. So everything else acquires maybe secondary meaning, but with respect to what our attention is actually focusing on this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you that you have mentioned before that you were writing a book on this.
Yes.
Writing a book on body or on attention. I'm curious.
Yes, I'm writing a book actually about embodied attention, so probably both of them, so to say. Basically, the main ideas of my book are what I said in the article you read. I will just try to make things more subtle, more clear, and to give much more examples and to take into account a larger body of work in empirical psychology, but also from other philosophers and philosophical tradition. What I didn't do, for example, in the article is really taking into account what is going on in the theory of mind. Authors such as Christopher Mole or Wayne Wu are writing extensively very interesting stuff about attention. I only mentioned it's really en passing in the article, and I will be dealing with that much more. At the moment, I am actually writing in Germany because I have to write in German now to fulfill my obligations here at the university. But my idea at this moment, it will change with time. It's always like that. But my idea would be then to publish maybe a shorter version of the book in English. But this is a plan for the next 4 to 5 years, I would say.
I understand. Yeah, I would really like to read it, to be able to read it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a nice encouragement to go on.
Do you have any points that you want to add on that I haven't mentioned?
No, I think we actually spoke about all the main points on this. Maybe if you or the listeners or your friends could be interested, I will be organizing a conference here in Würzburg in June, probably. At least a part of that will be online, and so on attention and action, and so maybe we can stay in contact. And if you are interested, you are more than welcome to join the conference.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, and the conference will be actually a joint venture between philosophers and psychologists, so it could be interesting for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop.